This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon, friends. Baruch haba to the Kol Agad Pirka Monday afternoon National Shiur. Thanks everyone for joining. Parshas Chukas, Tavshin, Pei Daled. If you had a chance, last night we had our annual shul dinner and campaign meeting, and we unleashed the new plans for the new Beis HaMedrash for its expansion and refurbishing, Be'ezus Hashem, for the recording studio. And if you would like to see some of the renditions, I'm gonna show you right now. Do you see? Could you see on the screen? Can you see on the screen? This is just the first mock-up. There'll be a lot of tweaks, and it'll be even nicer than this. This is just like the basic design from the outside. Kehilas Tefaris Mordechai. This is the interior seating, men's section, women's section, lobby, men's entrance, separate women's entrance, and downstairs here will be the recording studio. And if anybody would like to join, we're having a campaign this coming weekend, Motzai Shabbos, beginning at 10 p.m. charity.com/MMH. Be'ezus Hashem, it should be B'siyata D'Shmaya. Okay, so we have a very important topic today. We're going to speak about the history of the Parah Aduma. This is a topic we haven't discussed for many years, and it's a fascinating subject. The procedure and the process of the Parah Aduma. And even though in our eyes, maybe in our minds, this is something that was only observed in ancient times, I think you'll be surprised to learn that it may have been practiced more recently than you could imagine. The Mishnah says in Masechta Parah that we know that someone who becomes tamei with tumas meis. By the way, it's very interesting, just as a general idea, we know that the Parah Aduma was somehow a kapara for the Chet HaEgal. And you think about it, the Parah Aduma, it's a kapara for the Chet HaEgal, but the Parah Aduma is taher tmeim. What does that have to do with the Chet HaEgal? Well, isn't it interesting that because of the Chet HaEgal, people died again? So had it not been for the Chet HaEgal, the Parah Aduma would not have been necessary, would not have been needed. But because of the Chet HaEgal, Ani amarti Elohim atem uvnei elyon kolachem achen ka'adam timosun. Because of the Chet HaEgal, people had to die again. So because of the Chet HaEgal, it was necessary to get kapara and tara for if somebody came into contact with a mess. So the Mishnah says in Parah, umazin alav kol shivas hayamim. They would sprinkle on the person all 7 days, not only from the current Parah Aduma, but mikol chatoi shahayusham, from all the Paras Aduma. From all the Paras Aduma. Are you able to see the screen? Yeah? You able to see my because? You able to hear me? Good. How many Parah Adumas were there in history? Also very interesting. The Mishnah says, Parah Gimel Mishnah Hey.
It's not on video.
The Marmakomos are not on video?
No, nothing's on video.
I can see the Marmakomos.
Yeah, it's on. Thank you. Yeah, it's up on the screen. If it's not, then maybe fix your connection. Okay. Lo yimatzu misheva. They couldn't find from 7 Parah Adumas. Ois and Mishesh, they would make a concoction out of 6, or Mechamesh from 5, Me'arba, Me'shalosh, Mishtayim, Me'achas. Umi Asan, who made the concoction of the Parah Aduma? After all, it's not just a red cow. It's mixed with the ashes and the burnt cow. So Harishayna Asa Moshe, the first one was made by Moshe. Vashniya Asa Ezra. There were 5 from Ezra, non-Rabbi Meir. This is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. The sages say Sheva me Ezra ve'elach, 7 from Ezra non. Umi Asan, who produced them, Shimon HaTzadik, V'Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Shimon HaTzadik and Yochanan Gadol, they asu shtayim, they each made 2. El Yehoy Einai ben Akoif v'Chanam al Mitzvah Yishmael ben V'Yavi. So they made, Shimon HaTzadik made 2. Yochanan Gadol made 2. El Yehoy Einai ben Akoif Chanam al Mitzvah Yishmael ben V'Yavi asu achas. They each made 1. So that's how you get 7. And the Rambam says in history there are a total of 10. And the 10th one will be produced by Melech HaMashiach Mehera Yegala Amen Kein Hiratzai. So we would think, the last recorded sighting of the Parah Aduma was after the times of Ezra by Shimon HaTzadik, Yochanan Gadol, Yehoy Einai ben Akoif. And yet we encounter an amazing Gemara. The Gemara says in Chagiga on Daf Chafhei, Va'amar Ula Chavraya Medakon Begalila. Chavraya, Chaverim, those who are makbid on Dinei Tumah V'Tara, they would purify themselves in the Galil. They would purify themselves in the Galil. What did they purify themselves with? A mikvah? You could do that in the 5 towns. In the 5 towns they also have a mikvah. I think in Queens also I heard that they have a mikvah. Or wherever else you are. But, is that what the Gemara means? That they were matar themselves in the Galil? So, it's interesting that this seems to indicate they were able to purify themselves from Tomas Meis. In fact, there's a Mishnah Lamelech in Hilchos Avelos, Perek Aleph, Halacha Gimel. The Mishnah Melech says that in the times of the Amoraim, they still had the ashes of the Parah Aduma, long after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Not only when the Beis HaMikdash stood, but even after the Churban. Not only in the times of Tanoim, even in the times of Amoraim. In the Gemara in Chagiga is reporting that they were able to matire themselves in the Galil. The Mishnah Melech says, "V'zacharni shariz v'makam echad." I remember I saw somewhere, when they were exiled to Babel, they brought the ashes of the Parah Aduma with them. It's assumed that when the Mishnah Melech says he saw somewhere, he means he saw in the Sefer HaTruma in Hilchos Eretz Yisrael, and he explained what we find in many places in Bab Metzia, that the Amoraim would mark the Kvaros because of the Kohanim, right? We know there's a Gemara in Bab Metzia that the Amoraim used to mark the Kvaros so the Kohanim would not inadvertently step over it. Let's say Rabbi Benah would mark Kvarim. Why would they mark Kvarim in the times of the Amoraim? They were all Tamei Meis anyway. What was the purpose of marking of the Kvarim? There's no additional chiyuv to be zahir. It must be.
It's usher for a kohen to be matama.
What?
It's usher for a kohen. It's an avera for a kohen to be matame tumas meis. Therefore, to protect the kohanim, the graves have to be marked.
Yeah, but what if they're ready tamei meis?
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Every exposure of a kohen tumas meis is an avera. It's oraisa.
But does that mean that you're obligated to mark kvarim that would otherwise be unknown? The Mishnah Melech says no. In other words, you're a fine kohen, you're a reputable kohen. That we know, right? But there'll be 2 reasons why you want to have a kever marked. Number 1, you don't want to do the avera of becoming tamei, right? But the second reason, and maybe even more important, is you don't want to lose your status of tara. Okay, you want to remain tahar. If you're already tamei, okay, and contacting the kever, another kever that you didn't know about, which is not going to add tumah, and you had no expectation to know, what would the inyan be to mark off a kever? In other words, if the kohen's already tamei, he's not adding to his tumah status. Elamai, you want to protect him from sin? There is no sin. It's not even a shoygeg. It's a complete oines. Do you have to mark something off so that a person doesn't do an avera ba'oines? The Mishnah Melech is arguing no. In other words, Michael wants to say, well, maybe they marked it off because it's not allowed, a kohen is not allowed to contract tumah, even if he already has a status of tumah. But it seems like the Mishnah Melech is arguing that if it was impossible, if it was not reasonable for the kohen to expect there's tumah there is no, it's not even ideal to mark it off, so let him become tumah again. He's not allowed, he's not doing anything wrong, the Mishnah Melech is arguing. So, must be that in the times of the Gemara, they were able to maintain a status of Tara. How so? But everyone comes into contact with a mess. The answer is, says the Mishnah Melech, it must be, as the Gemara in Chagiga indicates, they had the Efer of the Parah, like the Gemara in Chagiga says, Chavraya Medaken Begalila. Now, why were the Kohanim in the Galil, why were they Mataher themselves? Right. By the way, it doesn't say the Kohanim, it says Chaverim. It says people who were Zohir in Tumah V'Tara, they were Mataher themselves. It says the Gemara in Chagiga, Rashi explains, they would produce their wine and oil for the Menachais, B'Tara, because maybe the Beis Mikdash would be built quickly. So that shows they were able to Mataher themselves from a mace. Otherwise, how could they be metaher their wine and their oil? So this, says the Mishnah Melech, indicates that the Parah Aduma still continued in the times of the Amoraim. Comes the Maharitz Chios, and Maharitz Chios says something out of this world. He says, now that we've been apprised that they had the ashes of the Parah Aduma, even in the times of the Amoraim, we could answer a very major stira in the Torah. The Torah writes in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, Siman Tafresh Gimel, the Torah brings the Yushalmi that Reb Chia said to Rav, if you could eat the whole year b'tahara, eat, says Reb Chia to Rav. And if you're not able to observe Tahara the whole year, eat 7 days in the year. Okay? Which 7 days? The Torah says he heard from the Rosh. The 7 days are the 7 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. What do you mean? But they're 10 days? No, they're not 10 days. Because we don't have to tell you to be tahar on Rosh Hashanah. Of course you're going to be tahar on Rosh Hashanah. Chayiv Adam letahar atzmai beregel. So it's not needed to say that a person should be matar themselves for 10 days. All we need to say is to be matar in the 7 days, because Rosh Hashanah anyway, you'll be tahar because chayiv adam matar atzmai beregel. That's what the Torah writes in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah. Many are matmiya on the Torah from another halacha. The Torah says in close proximity that in Hilchos Yom Kippur, the Torah brings the psak of Reb Sadia Gaon, that when you go to the mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur, you should make a bracha. Okay? Did you know the most important tevilah in a mikvah for a man the whole year is Erev Yom Kippur? There's a very important minhag to go Erev Rosh Hashanah. Some are machmir on Tvilas Ezra, but going to the mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur is a takana, and therefore Rav Sadia Gaon says you should make a bracha. Comes the Torah, and the Torah, quoting his father, is madche Rav Sadia Gaon. You have to make a bracha on the tefillah. The Gemara doesn't say anything about going to the mikveh Erev Yom Kippur. But Rabbi Yitzchak said, Chayiv Adam l'tar atzmai beregel. Of course Chayiv Adam l'tar atzmai beregel. That's what the ashes of the Parah Aduma. And we don't have the ashes of the Parah Aduma anymore. Of course Chayiv Adam l'tar atzmai beregel. But that won't obligate you to go to the mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur. Chayiv Adam l'tar atzmai beregel means you need to purify yourselves with the ashes of the Parah Aduma. And we don't have that anymore. So the Achronim ask, why when it comes to Erev Yom Kippur, did the Torah say we don't make a bracha on the tefillah on Erev Yom Kippur because the Tara that's required for Yom Kippur is with the Parah Aduma and we don't have that anymore? And yet when it comes to Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, the Torah says that a person should try to eat 7 days a year b'tahara. Why not 10 days? because anyway, you need to be mitaher yourself on Rosh Hashanah, because chayiv adam tar atzmai beregel. What do you mean? But we don't have the ashes of the Parah Aduma anymore. How could the Torah say that Reb Chia, when he said to Rav, just be careful about 7 days, but he didn't include Rosh Hashanah, because anyway, chayiv adam tar atzmai beregel. What do you mean? Chayiv adam tar atzmai beregel means with the ashes of Parah Aduma, and we don't have the ashes of the Parah Aduma anymore. So comes the Maritz Chios. Now, the Bach answers very simply. The Bach says, when it comes to Yom Kippur, the Torah was just pushing off the psak of Reb Sadia Gaon. Reb Sadia Gaon says, make a bracha on the tefillah. Says the Torah, we don't have to make a bracha on the tefillah, because you're not becoming tahar, because you need the ashes of Parah Aduma, which you no longer have. But, even though we don't have the ashes of Parah Aduma, since chayiv adam atar atzmai beregel, you need to purify yourself on the regel with whatever you can, even though you don't have the ashes of Parah Aduma, and therefore we try to do our best, and therefore a person should try to purify themselves during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva on Rosh Hashanah. But says the Maritz Chios, according to the Mishnah Melech, there's no stira at all. In Hilchos Yom Kippur, the Rosh and the Tur ask on Reb Sadia Gaon. They say, how could you make a bracha on the Tevilah? The Tara that's required on Yom Kippur is with the ashes of the Parah Aduma, and in the times of Reb Sadia Gaon, they certainly did not have the ashes of the Parah Aduma. But in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, the Torah is trying to explain what Reb Chia said to Rav. Reb Chia said to Rav, you need to be pure 7 days a year. So the question is, why didn't he say Rosh Hashanah also? The answer is, he doesn't have to say Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah anyway, we're going to be pure, because chayiv adam atar atzmai beregel. And in the times of Reb Chia and Rav, they definitely had the ashes of the Parah Aduma. So there's no stira in the Torah. In Hilchos Yom Kippur, the Torah is asking on Reb Sadia Gaon. In the times of Reb Sadia Gaon, they didn't have the ashes of Parah Aduma. In the Torah in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, he's explaining what Reb Chia said to Rav. In the times of those Amoraim, they did have the ashes of the Parah Aduma. If you look in the Maritz Chios on Chagiga, let's see if we could read this inside. Says the Maritz Chios, Ayin Mishnah Melech Perek Gimel Mehilchas Avel Halach Yebeish Ha'ilicha Imam Eifar HaParah. V'al Pizeh, accordingly, Yashavti L'nacha Divrei HaTorah B'Shem HaRash. I could answer the stira of the Torah in the name of the Rosh. The B'Soif Hilchos Rosh Hashanah Siman Tafresh Beis Hevi Lashon HaYushalmi De Reb Chia Mafgid LaRav. Reb Chia warned Rav, I at Yachalecha Kula Shasa B'Tara Echal. If you could eat the whole year in purity, you should. V'im Lav, and if you can't, Echol Zayin Yamim, at least eat B'Tara 7 days, B'Shasa. Hainu Bein Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. V'al Yom Tif Atzmai, and on Yom Tif itself, Lo Hayot Tzarch La'Ashirai. He didn't have to warn him. Mishum D'Chayiv Adam L'Tar Atzmai B'Regel. V'Divrei HaTorah Soisman, the words of the Torah contradict each other. D'Behilchos Yom Kippur, Siman Tafresh Rav, Kasav HaRash V'HaTur, Lidchos Divrei Reb Sadia Gaon. There the Torah pushes off the psak of Reb Sadia Gaon, Shematzrich Bracha Al Tefillah Erev Yom Kippur, who requires a bracha on the Tefillah Erev Yom Kippur. V'Dachu, and the Torah pushes off Reb Sadia Gaon, D'Harei Chayiv Adam Tar Beregel, Hainu B'Hazava Eifar Parah. Aval Lefi Hanal, but according to the Mishnah Melech, Dila Didan D'Lesan Eifar Parah, that we don't have the ashes of the Parah Aduma, Shaper Maksha Harash V'Ator, the Rosh and the Torah asking good. Aval B'Soif Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, but at the end of Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, Bala Faresh Divrei Reb Chia L'Rav, he's coming to explain the words of Reb Chia to Rav, and in the times of Reb Chia and Rav, of Vizmanei Hayadayin Eifar Parah, there was the ashes of the Parah Aduma. Now it's interesting that this Chidush of the Maritz Chios, quoting the Mishnah L'Melech, that the ashes of the Parah Aduma were extant even in times of the Amoraim, there is somewhat of a contradiction from a Medrash called Medrash Lekach Tov. In the Medrash Lekach Tov it says that Rabbi Yochanan said from the day the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Ein tahara mimeis, lefi she'ein lano efer hapar lahazais. From the day the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there's no purity from a mess, because we don't have the ashes. So that seems to be in contradistinction to this diuk of the Mishnah Lamelech from the Gemara in Chagiga of Chavraya Hayu Medakin Galil. But now we'll get ready for the bombshell. So the Mishnah Lamelech is mechadesh that the Amoraim had the ashes of Adumah. Comes the Chida, Reb Chaim Yosef David Azulai. Yesterday I saw in one of the biographies of the Chida, in Lashon HaKodesh, the word Chida with a hey at the end is a riddle. That the greatness of the Chida was a riddle. How he was able to accomplish so much, write so much, be immersed in so many different subjects of Torah. The Chida writes in the Midbar Kedemus, which is one of his encyclopedias, that the ashes of the Parah Aduma, the Amoram had them, like the Gemara in Chagig indicates, Chavraya Medakin Begalil, quoted by the Mishnah Melech. Says the Chida, with this we could explain what it says in the Yishalmi, Rav would be able to eat chulin b'tahara ba'asaras yimei tshuva. The Yishalmi says Rav was able to eat chulin in a state of purity in the days of repentance. V'havu b'rabban b'asra tuva. And he was in the times of the much later rabbis. Says the Chida, this yediyah of that the Amoraim had the ashes of the Parah Aduma could explain another phenomenon to us. How did the Amoraim reach such great levels of holiness? With this we could understand how the Amoraim were so holy. And nowadays, even if you were to find someone who would want to sanctify themselves and separate from the ways of the world, even if somebody would put in great efforts, he would not be successful in really elevating and sanctifying himself. In other words, the Chida says in our times, there is something holding us back from great sanctity. You know what it is? Ki hatumos chadashos gam yeshanos asher anachnu ba'avoseinu bam. Because the impurities, the new ones, the old ones that we have, that our fathers had, hayu ba'oichrenu, they sully us. Ki hata'ara ma'akeves. Purity is ma'akev. There's an idea that tahara is called das. And what's holding us back from achieving great das, we take it for granted. We say, okay, we're tamei meis. What's the problem? It's not an avera for maybe a Yisrael to be tamei meis. Does it affect us? Of course it affects us. We take it for granted. We live in a world of tumah. But tumah affects our spiritual attainment. Nowadays, even with great efforts, we'll achieve minimally. So, says the Chida, in that case, how was it that the Arizal reached and scaled such heights of wisdom, of Kedusha, of revelation? Says the Chida, V'ani b'aniyusi, and I am my impoverished state. Pshitoli, it's obvious to me. The Ari, if he was able to achieve such understanding of the secrets of Torah, it's Parsha. He was metaher with the ashes of the Parah Aduma. Who brought it to him? Al Yedei Eliyahu. We know that a lot of the teachings of the Arizal were from revelation of Eliyahu HaNavi. There's a big machlokes. The Chida says that if the Beis Yosef would have known about certain things that the Arizal argued, he would have retracted. That is based on the idea that many of the teachings of the Ari were revealed to him by Eliyahu HaNavi, so the Beis Yosef can't argue on Eliyahu HaNavi. And Rabbi Vadya Yosef writes First of all, not everything that Ari taught was from Eliyahu HaNavi, and who says the Beis Yosef would have retracted? But the bottom line is that if the Ari was able to reach such great levels, it must be, it's obvious to me, says the Chida, that Eliyahu would bring the Ari, the ashes of the Parah Aduma, through Eliyahu HaNavi, and then the heavenly spirit would rest on the Ari, lahafli, wondrously. Says the Chida, where did I see this idea that Eliyahu would bring the Arizal, the ashes of the Parah Aduma? The Hagam Kiloi Ra'isi Kasav Remez Miza, even though I didn't even see this idea alluded to. V'loi Shamati, I never heard it, nobody told it to me. I never saw in a sefer that Ari had the ashes of the Parah Aduma. I never heard that he had the ashes. Libi Oimerli, my heart tells me, Shaharav Zal Hoyamalim Adavar, that Ari would hide the matter. Helem Nimratz, an absolute hiding, L'Roi Van V'Sanusai, in his great humility. So now we're learning, not only did the Amoram have the ashes of Parah Aduma in the world of the Chida, so did the Arizal already in the 16th century. And just to conclude, friends, this shiur on the history of the Parah Aduma, there are legends of, so to speak, the sightings of the ashes of the Parah Aduma in the Sefer Divrei Yechezkel, the biography of the Shinovar, in the paragraph, in his trip to Eretz Yisrael. This is quoted in the Pardes Yosef in this week's Parsha. He brings that when the Shinovar was in the Galil, he secluded himself in one of the mountains for an entire hour. And when they told Reb Shmuel Heller, the Rav of Tzfas, he says, well, of course he did, why not? We have a tradition that on this mountain is buried Klei Shares with the ashes of the Parah Aduma. Likewise, in the Sefer Toldos Chachmei Yisrael, he writes that Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Charlap wrote that the elders of Yerushalayim said over that Rabbi Menachem Mendel Mishkalav, student of the Gra, said that if anybody would ever need the ashes of Parah Aduma, he would show where exactly it was. So Rabbi say, the ashes of the Parah Aduma existed well after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, even in the times of the Amoraim. And I'm remembering now, friends, there's an amazing Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan says, on this week's Parsha, there's an expression that repeats itself twice. There's an expression by the Parah Aduma that seems very repetitive. It says about the Parah Aduma, at the end of the subject of the Parah Aduma, it says, Chukas oilam, v'hoisa lohem lechukas oilam, umazeh me'anida yechabes begadav. But that's not the only time it says Chukas oilam. It says another time Chukas oilam. And it says earlier in Pasuk Tes, the Asaf Ish Tahar Eis Eifra Par V'Nech Michutz L'Machon Maggid Harakiah V'Hoisal As Ne'esum Shaz Meida Chatasi. It says V'Hoisal L'Vnei Yisrael L'Ager Hagar B'Soicham L'Chukas Olam Yud Tes Yud. Why does it say Chukas Olam twice? Aruch HaShulchan says the second Chukas Olam is to teach that even when we don't have the ashes of the Parah Aduma, there's a mitzvah da'iraisa to read Parshas Parah. He uses that as a basis. We know that the Shulchan Aruch says that there's an opinion that Parshas Parah is da'iraisa. So Aruch HaShulchan says we learn that out from the second Chukas Olam. What do we learn from the first Chukas Olam, says Aruch HaShulchan? For the first Chukas Olam we learn out, you don't need a Beis HaMikdash to use the ashes of the Parah Aduma. So if the Gemara in Chagiga says that Amoram had the ashes of the Parah Aduma, how were they able to use it? Don't you need the Beis HaMikdash? Doesn't the pasuk say that well, what if you don't have an oil mayed? So then does that preclude you from using the ashes of Parah Aduma? So the Aruch HaShulchan says the first Chukas Olam says you don't need the Beis HaMikdash proper to utilize the procedure of the Parah Aduma. So this is another support to this idea that the Beis HaMikdash was not necessarily needed. So Be'ezus Hashem, even before Mashiach comes, when Eliyahu HaNavi comes, he can reveal to us the whereabouts of the Parah Aduma, and then we could be metaher ourselves, and we could get the ball rolling. Now, will we have to wait for Moshe Rabbeinu to make the ashes? That's what the Rambam writes in his Pirush HaMishnayos. But the Rambam also says that we don't know exactly how things will play out in the end of days until it happens. So, Be'ez Hashem, we hope to hear the Besura Tova of Eliyahu HaNavi B'Karov, and he'll let us know whether he's going to show us where the last ashes were, or we're going to wait for Moshe Rabbeinu to make the next one. Rabbi Isai, I wish everyone a great day, bracha v'atzlacha, and be matzliach. All the best. Bye-bye.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.